Should you lift heavy? Should you do heavy weights for low reps, or should you do high reps with low weight? It's the ongoing dilemma and the saga of, I guess, in my case, the last 50 years. In any event, the answers have always been there. There's been so much information and articles and discussion and all that stuff and science and, science tells us you should train somewhere between 50% to 85% every 1 RM. That's where you should train. Okay, I agree with that. I personally think there's just too much science and not enough instinct and not enough art of bodybuilding and not enough. But everybody's into science and engineered nutrition and all this nonsense. But basically, I agree. You should train between 50 to 85% every 1 RM. That's where how much weight you should use. Ideally, the problem is you've got to do heavy weights for a lot of reps. I'll repeat that. You've got to do heavy weights for a lot of reps. You can't just do heavy weights for low reps all the time and do light weights below 50% of your 1 RM. You can't do that. That's not going to work. The answer is no. The results are 0. Okay, so basically, you've got to train and condition yourself to do heavy weights for a lot of reps. It takes time. It takes years. It takes a career. It doesn't happen in 60, 90 days, a year, 2, 3. It takes a lifetime. And that's where I think most modern-day bodybuilders go wrong. Fitness enthusiasts, they think it's going to all happen today. The technique will be learned in 20 days, 30 days. It takes a lifetime of practice. The old weightlifters, they worked on broomsticks for hours. The technique was a religious experience. It wasn't just, here's how you do it, done. But getting into what I wanted to talk about, and not shying away from that, you've got to do, time and tension. Time and tension are the two key factors. The heavy weights, there's a lot of tension, but not enough time. The light weights, there's a lot of time, but not enough tension. So that's why science tells us you should train between 50 to 85% of your 1 RM. There's opportunity for time and tension. If you just lift heavy all the time, though, if you do the 3s and the 5 reps and, the 8 reps and the 6 reps, you'll get stagnant. You might get somewhat of a response, but it's not enough. It's not enough to really put it together and really build some quality muscle. Most of the time you see powerlifters, and they're extremely strong. Nervous systems are extremely conditioned, and they know how to lift and what muscles to use. A lot of times we see powerlifters squat in the gym in the morning. I train with them, and their legs are tiny, but they're squatting 800 pounds. So what I'm getting at is a lot of hip flexors and buttocks and lower backs that are used. But in order to, to really train, you've got to do some heavy weights and for a lot of reps, as I said. So essentially, you have to focus on the 3s, the 5s, the 8s, the 6s sometimes, but more often you should focus on the 15s, the 25s, the 35, and the 40 reps. Yes, 40, 50 reps even per set. And not just a pump weight, not 50% or below 50% of your 1 RM, a good solid weight. And this is the dilemma, this is this problem, and you can only train for this, and it does take years. So, having said that, it's important to really think about training from this aspect. I mean, usually an ectomorphic person, more of a red fiber person, can train higher reps, but they have to do, they have the availability and the possibility of training more often. They can do higher reps with more frequency. A mesomorphic person, a mesomorphic individual is good at the heavy weights, but they can't train as often. Their frequency has to be lower. There's only so many things you can alter: volume, intensity, frequency, and then workload. There's 4 things you can vary. And then from there, you can get into, half reps, quarter reps, partial reps, static reps, partial statics, negatives, forced positives, and forced negatives, forced positives, and all that stuff in between. And you can vary the cadence and the tempo and all that stuff, and how fast you move the bar, the speed of the rep, all this stuff, acceleration. There's a lot of things you can vary, but still, when it comes down to it, the reps are more important than the heavy weights. I'll repeat that. The reps are more important than the heavy weights. For instance, when I first came to California, we did a lot of heavy stuff back in Michigan, and, squattings and deadlifts and, big bench presses and all that stuff. But arms was always my personal dilemma. When I first came out to California in 1978, through my whole tenure training in Gold's Gym and World's Gym, I don't think I ever saw some of the greatest bodybuilders with the greatest arms in the world do more than a 45-pound dumbbell. I never saw Arnold use more than a 45-pound dumbbell. Some of the greatest arms in the world, the world's ever seen. And, he most of the time, used a 35, 40-pound dumbbell. He would, in the exercise of choice, the squat for biceps was a seated dumbbell curl. The inclined dumbbell curl alternating each arm and supinating and pronating. That was the squat for biceps. The squat for triceps was the push down. Simple stuff. It gets so complicated now. Everybody wants to do a magical movement. The magical movements is what I just listed. But the reps have to be done. I mean, on biceps, I can remember doing 5 and 10 minute sets with a 35-pound dumbbell. This is what it takes if you're training, for reals, or maybe you're just carving up and taking some substance and you get pumped up and you get sort of full looking, but that's not really the acquisition of real cellular muscle. It's just you're sort of a bloat pump person. But that's sometimes what bodybuilding is to a lot of people. I get that, I understand that, but it can be more and should be more. Staying with the plan, reps versus heavy, I mentioned that reps are far more important than heavy weights, but you've got to do both, and you've got to do reps for a lot of weight for reps. It does take time to get there, yes, as I alluded to that. But by practicing on one day, doing the lower reps, between 5s and 8s and 10s and 12s, I consider lower reps, it will allow you to train on the other day with over 15 reps a set, 25 and 35 and 40 and 50 reps a set. You have to do both, but as you go heavy, it makes the lightweight day possible, and as you go the lightweight day, it makes the heavy day possible. They fit hand in hand. They blend, and that's really the secret or the message of this podcast. You need to do both, but it's more important to do reps, as I mentioned. Okay. That is simply it. And I hope you've followed what I was saying and it made sense to you. But the reps are more important than just the heavy weights. You see a lot of powerlifters that don't look that strong but are. And again, the nervous system is trained, and they know how to train the major muscles of the body to move the weight, not the muscles that really bodybuilders would like to build. Time and tension. Actin and myosin sliding, if you really want to get into the science, when there's time and tension, there's more actin and myosin sliding. There's not enough time to do that when you're just doing heavy weights. However, you can you can train for, as I mentioned, you can train to lift heavier weights for a lot of reps, and it does take time, as I alluded to and stated. Okay, I think that's the message for today. In fact, that is the message for today. And I hope in some way
talk about the risk by lifting too heavy.
Well, one thing you should not do is train heavy all the time and take super maximum risk. I mean, there is a risk involved with any exercise. If there's not a risk involved with an exercise, it's probably not worth doing. However, there's a benefit to risk ratio that you're always assessing in training. I mean, you really shouldn't take any undue risk all the time without a calculated degree of success. I mean, I did just say, of course, if there's not some risk within an exercise, it's not worth doing. I mean, squat is hard to do. There's a risk involved, but it's also worth doing because if it's done correctly and properly with good technique, you will reap the benefit. But too heavy all the time doesn't allow. It does encourage perfect technique, but a lot of times your technique will vary from rep to rep, and if it's too heavy, it can cause injury, and that's what we don't want to do. We don't want to train heavy all the time and take any undue risk, but there is a risk involved in weight training, period. There's a risk involved in crossing the street. You do have to take some risk, and exercise has to have some risk to be successful, and otherwise it's not worth doing, yes, but how much risk you're willing to take is the question and is the concern. Too much risk, too heavy, too often, on too many exercises doesn't produce the desired result. From a cellular point of view, muscle cell point of view, plus it's too risky and it's not worth doing, because if you get injured then you can't train and it's over anyhow. So I would suggest being very careful in terms of how much risk you take, even though there is an inherent risk in every exercise. It's beneficial. That benefit to risk ratio is something you have to look at. We've talked a lot about intention and attitude and having your life pass in front of your eyes over the last weeks. You don't just go to the gym and do the required number of reps and leave. You have to give, demand, focus, insist, create from within. You have to conjure it up. You have to go after it. You have to make it happen. It's not just going to happen by itself because you did the required number of reps. It's like an artist. You can do they do all kinds of things with a brush and the colors, but eventually, I mean, you have to create something from within. The energy comes from within, not from the outside. It comes from within. Even though you're doing the weights and moving the weight, you have to have some kind of mental process going on to where you're creating something and it connects the brain to the muscle. If that makes sense. That is probably it for today. It's late here. But I wanted to relate to you the importance of, or the meaning between reps and heavy weights. But with continued training, as I mentioned earlier on in the podcast, in having heavy days and having light days, eventually you'll be able to basically do heavier and heavier weights for more reps, and that's the key. That is the key. And I wish you the best of success in your gym quest. But even though you're doing the reps and the sets progressively, demand it, see it happening before it happens, create it. You have to create it from within and make it happen. And if it doesn't happen, it has to be to the point to where your life depends upon it, because if you don't think that way, you won't get the results. Your life depends upon it. Whether it's when you go to the gym, it's not just a little exercise here and there. Your life depends upon it. Thank you very much.